Hi there, students. This video is a tutorial on value drawing, the different shading techniques, and adding textures and details. Your essential questions that you need to know for this lesson are: what is hatching? What is cross-hatching? How do I apply shading techniques? And when do I add detail and textures? What is hatching? Hatching is where you create value by putting several individual strokes side by side. Hatching is great for grass, hair, fur textures, smooth forms, and also adding bumps or ripples in things. What is cross-hatching? Cross-hatching is one of my favorite techniques. It creates value by using intersecting strokes. Just like hatching, your strokes are individual strokes put side by side. Every time you intersect your strokes, it adds a level of darkness to your value. Cross-hatching is great for rough textures or images that have very clearly defined value shapes. The thing about cross-hatching is that it can be challenging for beginners at times, until they master the concept of value shapes, until they perceive their subject, all those lights and darks, as simply a conglomeration of shapes that are light and dark. Now, how do I apply the shading techniques? How do I actually do it on the paper? Well, shading techniques are used in the following ways. Obviously, is whenever you're applying value to a piece, and also when you're applying texture. Now, value and texture are two different things. Value is the effect that light has on a subject, and it's the light and dark within it. Texture is the illusion of texture on a surface. Bumps, cracks, pimples, kind of rough gravelly effects, grass, fur, and so on. So when you're using a shading technique to create value, it involves a couple of things. The first is a term called your stroke frequency. Frequency means how frequent it happens. How often does a stroke occur on your paper? A high frequency means you have tons and tons and tons of strokes compacted into a small little area. And high frequency is what you're doing when you create value. It makes your values smooth. You don't see the strokes because they are so densely packed together. Low frequency is when you have very few strokes in a given area, and it's great for details and textures. With a low frequency, you actually see your strokes. And this is great if you're trying to create hair. You want to see the strokes so that you can actually recognize hair. The other thing you need to know when applying value, and you've learned this already, is pressure. How hard do you push using your tool? Obviously, pressure makes things light or dark. So essentially, when creating value, controlling your pressure and controlling your frequency is how you achieve different effects. If you want to make a darker value, but your pressure is light, no matter how many times you draw over and layer on top of that value, it will stay dim. So you need to use pressure when you're applying value. How do you make textures? Textures, as stated earlier, use a low frequency. That's so that we can see the strokes in order to have a specific effect. Now this next part's pretty cool. Anytime you do a texture on the surface of your drawing, you put more texture in the darker areas than in the lighter. That's because when the light hits your subject, it actually burns out the values and it burns out the textures. So we'll see more texture in your shade and your midtone than we will in your highlight and other light values. Another thing that's important when applying texture is to take into the account the three-dimensional surface of your subject. If you're adding texture to a rounded form, the angle of your strokes and the direction your textures are going need to match that form. Otherwise, your work will look flat. And you create textures just by creatively playing around with your shading techniques, and you'll see several demonstrations. Now, when you're applying your shading techniques to create textures or values, you must keep the following in mind for strong craftsmanship. Keep your strokes small. As you'll see in the demo, when your strokes get very large, it gets to be difficult to control. If you want smooth and crisp, clean work, keep your strokes, try to shoot for no more than an inch. Also, keep your frequency consistent if it's in a value that's going to stay consistent. Also, keep the angles of your strokes consistent. That means all your strokes in a given area should be going the same direction. Even if they're curving across the contours of the form, they'll stay consistent. If you have some wild strokes that kind of go out like this, and you're trying to make a smooth value, it's going to look really sloppy. All right, and finally, when do I add detail and textures? When do you do this in your workflow? Details and textures are added near the very end of your workflow because if you have more textures in your darker areas than your light, then you need to have already laid down those darker areas before you apply your textures, or else you won't know where they go. Now in the demo, you will see an exception to this. You'll see that there are times when you can actually create value using only your textures. Here's an example of a drawing that's composed entirely of textures. There are really no solid blocks of value underneath the textures. I did this to show you how frequent textures occur in your work. And you create textures by manipulating your shading techniques. And I see a wide variety of different textures here. Obviously, we've got scales. We've also got rippled horns. We've got webbing in between the horns. We've got hair that's long. We've got hair that's short. We've also kind of got this ridged gill type look. Most of this is done entirely with hatching techniques that have been changed. The scale is simply alternating strokes that are slightly curved, almost like a brick wall. Now with these membranous areas, that are kind of soft tissue, this is simply hatching. And the strokes are slightly curved because the surface of the subject is curved as well. The horns are simply curved hatching strokes. Hair can be a challenge, and I have a separate lesson on that. Long story short, you treat the hair in clumps, and the textures go in the darker areas of those clumps. And that's it for the informative part of this piece. The demo is long because it covers a wide range of different textures and techniques. If you need to take a break, feel free. The questions are at the end of the lesson. And let's begin. Hey everybody, in this demonstration I'm going to show you hatching and cross-hatching, and also different varieties of textures that you can achieve in your work to make it look realistic. I'm going to use a Pigma Micron permanent ink pen, mainly so you can see the individual strokes and it's going to be more visible. Also, I'm going to be using my mechanical pencil, which you've seen in all my other demonstrations up to this point. So the first shading technique, as you know, is hatching. Hatching is simply several parallel strokes, side by side, one after the other. Using your pencil, we can achieve value by pushing light or hard as we hatch. Also, we can achieve a nice even spread of value by having what's called a high frequency. Frequency means how frequent does it occur? How often is there a stroke on your paper? A very low frequency might be you have like 4 strokes per inch. A very high frequency might be that you have like 20 or 30 strokes per inch. If you want nice, even, sandy, uniform tone, have a high frequency. And by combining how frequent you make a mark and how hard you make a mark, that's how you can achieve a variety of different effects. What's important to note when hatching is that your strokes must be uniform. If you're wanting to cover an area of value and have it uniform, but your strokes go in different directions, it will not be successful. It'll look sloppy. And beginners often have that mistake. The only solution to this is to concentrate and have experience and practice. The second mistake beginners often make is that they have their strokes way too long, and you start to lose control over your work. Your frequency becomes uneven. Also, it's harder to control the angle of your work. Most beginners do this out of a desire to get it done, rather than have craftsmanship. So I encourage you to leave your strokes no longer than an inch. Also, with small strokes, that's how you can achieve very dynamic darks and lights. I mean, you've got a wide range of different darks and lights, and little darks inside of the lights, and so on. You need small strokes for detail and craftsmanship. Now, when I say your strokes have to be going the same direction parallel, that's only limited per value shape. If you have a value shape, shaped like this, and you have also an adjacent area, a different value shape, going a different direction, that's okay. As a matter of fact, you can get some pretty cool effects this way. This could be reflective water. This could be the side of a mountain, or a rock, or a cliff face. If you're having a hard time achieving control over your work and it's looking like this or like this, I encourage you to try the following exercise. Make a complex blob type shape. Hatch the whole thing in one direction. Your goal is to not go outside of the lines and to get your value filled in clean and crisp to the edges of the form. If this is easy for you, increase the complexity by making a more complex form. So cross-hatching looks like this. What you do is you hatch one direction, and then you go another direction at a 90-degree angle. Now, just like in hatching, your frequency is very important. By having the same frequency for both directions, it looks good. If my frequency was very tight, and the and staggered in a few areas, all right? And then my next intersection was wide. It wouldn't work. It just looks a little off. So try to stay consistent with your frequency. Now, if you want a darker plane, just go another direction, like so. And if you want a darker plane yet, go another direction. How do you know which directions to go? Well, think like a compass. You can go north and south, you can go east and west, you can go up and to the right, and you can go up and to the left. So I'm going to draw a nose, and let's shade this nose. Crosshatching is great if you have many planes within whatever you're drawing. So let's take this top of the lip, for example. If I wanted to add a whole nother plane of value to it, all I have to do is, for example, where the shadow is cast from the nose, there might be a little cast shadow down here. I could add that by just adding another pass with my pencil. And if I want to make another little layer within that, I can just go a different direction. And that's an example of cross-hatching. You'll notice anytime you want a darker plane, all you have to do is intersect. Now, there's one thing you need to know about intersections. How hard you push still matters. If you want to get any dark bulk values, period, you need to increase the pressure as well. So that's how cross-hatching comes into play. It gives you more control over your value shapes. All right, let's look at a couple different ways to achieve texture using hatching. Yeah, that's just kind of a texture effect where I used hatching, parallel lines in order to achieve it. But you can actually use hatching to draw a texture or a furry surface. And the way that you do that is simply by knowing that gravity affects your form. The beginner will typically do this. All the hairs are going the same direction and they're mostly all the same size. Not really. If you want to get something that's a little bit more realistic, you'll know that gravity affects things. Some hairs will be pulled left and right and in the face of the viewer and away from the viewer and so on. And gravity pulls things down. There'll be little calyx inside of it. And so we need to give that illusion in this. You'll see that for the outside, most of all of my hairs, they all start at the same spot, but they end at different areas. One thing that I'm doing is I'm thinking, okay, what's gravity going to do? Well, gravity's going to pull the hairs down more down here. And as they go up to this area, they're going to kind of stick outward and down. When they come up here, they're going to be very short, but try to be pulled over to the side. That's something that you think about whenever you draw your form. How does the environment affect it? I make my hatching strokes different lengths. Some are short, some are medium, some are long, and so on. And not only that, but they also sometimes go different directions, because nature is organized chaos. And by doing this, we can achieve that effect. And that's how you draw with your hatching technique in order to give a fur illusion. Now, how would you add value to this? Let's put a light source up top. We've got highlight, midtone, shade. The sphere is a 3D form, which means hairs that are on the outside edge are going to be standing up, and those that are in here are going to be poking up at the viewer. So to us, the hair will actually look smaller, and then it'll get bigger as it gets to the outside. Watch what I mean. This represents the highlight. I have fewer strokes in this area. But as I get to the mid-tone, I'm going to have more strokes. And as I get to the shade, even more strokes. Once again, the reason is because the light burns out the values and the textures where it's directly hit. And the further light gets away, the more shadows you see. And it's those shadows that help us see that it's 3D and see the textures. Now the last touch I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and see if I can't pull any little value shapes out of here. Like maybe, just maybe, this little area right here is like a tuft of fur that kind of pokes out that's different from the rest of it. I can show that by adding more dark behind it. You know, he's kind of scraggly here around the outsides. If I want to make it look a little more appealing and less, you know, disheveled and unkept, you know, I can try to pull these values out a little bit and make a little bit, try to go for a little bit more uniform furriness to make it look more like a puffball instead of this shaggy-haired thingamabobber. And who knows what it is? Maybe it has, you know, fangs underneath it. But all I have to do is just round out the edges a little bit more using my hatching strokes. This kind of stuff's a lot of fun. It's a good way to zone out and kind of decompress if you're stressed. It's always good to do these type of exercises if you know, you want to get better. And it's a great way to doodle also. There we go. Now it's more of a puffball. And who knows what this is? You know, you can put little eyes on this, little spindly limbs. Maybe it's an antenna coming off of a creature. So that's hair. Let's try and hatch over a curved, like cable-like surface here. I'm just going to use kind of these half-moon type strokes, okay, as I do this. And I'm trying to keep them uniform as I go. But all of a sudden the cable turns. And the area, the point where all these strokes are originating, you know, that's going to kind of stay in one spot kind of as these turn. Here's a tree branch done in pencil. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add value to this, just like I would if it were a value drawing. And then I'm going to show you how to achieve texture on it. I'm basically going to make little bunches of strokes that curve like that. And I'm going to place them in different places across the bark. There will be more bunches of strokes like this in areas where there is less light. And my strokes will be longer in those areas. In the areas where there's more light, there will be fewer strokes. And if there are any at all, there will be very small ones because light burns out value and texture. So here we go. This is a dark little knot. I'm going to throw a couple little hatches in there. Maybe over here there lives a few. Maybe this area bulges out a bit. Let's throw a few over there as well. And there we go. So let's take a look at the difference between hatching and cross-hatching. This eye was done using hatching. This nose and mouth was done using cross-hatching. You can see that the boundaries between the value shapes are a lot more well-defined using this method. And the values using
hatching are a lot smoother. As you saw, hatching is great for, like hairs, fur, and also smooth effects. Cross-hatching is great for rough textures, and it gives you more control over your value shapes. And so it's really up to you which one you want to use and what kind of subject you're rendering. Well, that's that for the live demo, and answer the questions at the end of the video, and I'll look forward to seeing you in class. Take care.